You talked about politics last time and how it's important to have some basic understanding of fundamental principles, like what is freedom, um, what are rights, and then what should your viewpoint be given whatever your philosophical beliefs are. And then you separated that from, I can't remember what you used, but political action, I think you called it. You said that
Yeah,
that's almost like some kind of part career aspiration depending on your specific context. Like, for example, if you're in Australia, you may be way less involved in politics than if you were in Ukraine,
yeah,
or if you were of a particular kind of minority in some specific country, you may be more involved in politics than others. So I wanted to know though, have you found has politics, can you think of any examples of how politics has affected your personal relationships or your understanding of the abstract politics in terms of abstract principles, not less so political action, but can you think of any way it's affected your personal relationships, and do you have specific examples in mind?
I'll give a more um, context-based one or a more concrete example first. So I'm thinking of how, more in general, as a principle of how I interact with how to interact with people that may disagree, and how do I live in an environment that feels good, that is beneficial to my life. How do I relate to, how to get others to impact my life in a positive way, not just relationships with them, but say with employees or business people that I interact with, or even medical professionals, say, just interacting with all these people.
Yep.
There's certain standards. I mean, the society would have. How do you interact with people who disagree? How do we both get what we want when we both want something? How do we exchange with each other? When we just need to say, just say if you went to the doctor, you needed a vaccine and you want some kind of interaction. How do you get these things all to work together? How do we all cooperate in society? How do I exist within society? So it affects maybe how I think of when I might disagree with someone, how I consider the ways or the reasons they might disagree. What enables them to change their mind? In what way disagreeing can actually help discussion and learning and thinking those are more practical reasons. Um, Other practical things that's benefited. Um, it's hard to say, but I would say it helps interactions with people because maybe I'm more willing to engage with them by reason than emotion, because politically I know that force is not a way to interact. It doesn't accomplish anything. It doesn't get me anywhere. But interacting with persuasion does and is beneficial. So just working from that, not really on the big political action level. I'm not big into political action, but I'm interested in it, but it's not something I want to do.
And
Abstractly speaking, though, oh, go ahead.
yeah. No, continue.
Abstractly speaking, what does it do for my thinking and principles? I think of, say, what's the point of freedom? Why do I need a society? In what way can a society help me attain my ends? In what way society can? Or what does society do for me? What is my nature? In other words, um, why is it that freedom is good for me as an individual?
Okay.
It pertains
And
to how I
yeah,
get,
so continue.
how I attain my values and needs within society. How do I get in the build my environment in a way that works for my flourishing and flourishing around me?
How So can you think of examples where having those things in mind, I know it's putting you on the spot because maybe nothing will occur to you now. It's not always easy to recall examples, but like having those things in mind, like your concept of freedom, your concept of rights, and the way you abstractly view society, the concept of independence. So from a political, I mean, just speaking in terms of politics, how that has like affected an actual conversation. Like you've
Okay.
recalled a definition, or you've recalled the essence of some concept, and you're like, not in terms of an argument, but actually the way, because you brought up these questions, are like how you live with other people in a good way. How do you get what you want? What can you think of, like how these concepts, just for an average person,
Oh, sure.
preferably an example that you've got from your own life, but for an
Sure.
average person, like if I, like, let's say I start really learning what rights are and what freedom means, how would that affect day to day? Like what do you do with that?
Okay. Well, maybe this might help or be an example. I can think better of how people interact with each other, how they bring about, say, technological innovations. How is it that those occur? Then I can see it better when I think of politics. I see the way all the millions of parts, the millions of people affects the creation of all those things, that they're not completely isolated, that although our goals are independent, they manifest together as a society, and in the sense that there's unforeseen consequences of our choices that lead to something amazing. And also, I can point that out easier to people. I can talk about these wonderful things I see in terms of what's needed to bring that about, what sort of values are required for that. So it's a way to point out to people what I care about or share, what matters to me, because they might be able to value these same things too. More
Would I
concretely, go ahead.
No, continue. I'll ask you after. I've already got the question in mind. So
Okay, more concretely, um, say if I'm talking to somebody about like just drug use, or just as a casual conversation, like should marijuana be legal? I mean, I can talk about it in simpler terms if I understand at least politics about like, um, I might not think it's a good thing to do, but I really don't think it's not good to force people uh, to. You shouldn't. Or I was trying to think how to phrase this. You shouldn't force people to do what's good for them. I mean, like doing what's good should be a voluntary thing. It's not something you really could force people to do. We want autonomy. That's what we respect. We like these, or it's important to allow the autonomy to allow people to make decisions. And I might even be better able to say, well, the reason you want that freedom, think of yourself as an individual. Imagine something happened to you that you, well, if it was marijuana, I know people needed to deal with chronic pain as better than any other option. And you want that freedom to make that choice, to take that risk and use marijuana if they'll treat your issue. Or like with anything else, it shouldn't be up to a government to tell you how you should guide your life. And I can talk about these things much easier when I've already had these abstractions about freedom and rights. I can boil these abstract ideas down to simpler ideas, and I can exchange ideas better. I can talk about why it's bad to force people, why autonomy is important.
right.
More than just, oh, I like the consequences, but the way you live in the first place is dependent on these things. It's not, yeah, it's nice that we can learn more when we disagree with each other. But the real point of it is that freedom allows us the autonomy to make decisions, to allow us to make those choices and bring about those unforeseen consequences. precisely because you have autonomy to choose, that you can't predict ahead of time what you'll create or what you'll invent. You often need the freedom to make your decisions, to enhance your life around you, to create flourishing. Is usually, you can't just um, force people to do it. It's a thing that happens naturally. Their autonomy is what they need. It's by nature. The only way to get these positive flourishing effects is through autonomy and freedom.
I wonder if that links to, I know in economics, the broken window fallacy.
Yeah.
Where you smash a window and then you generate economic activity by having it replaced. But what you miss is that the wealth that there's the unseen wealth that could have been created. Now you've just replaced something. And so I wonder if there's a link
I
with
think
that
so.
in politics, where you can see certain things that are, well, you can't see the unseen, but you can see where if you maybe put in place a certain law, there's a lot of unseen potential that is ruined, but someone else might not see that. So
Yes. I think
okay.
that's a big part of it. That studying this kind of thing makes it easier to see those unseen effects or infer what the effects might be.
Have you found, okay, I mean, some of what you mentioned, the benefits, what I, at least the most important thing I noticed in what you said was, it seems like you're saying that one of the primary benefits for you was actually communication of your political ideals, because you're able to frame current events in, you're able to see the current events, or you're able to see current politics within an abstract frame that you've thought through, and then you're able to connect all kinds of things that are happening in the world to your understanding of politics, so then you're able to communicate it to someone else. That's what I mainly got. So mainly politics is for the communication of politics.
That's on the day-to-day level between
Okay.
other people, but that same thing occurs for me. I can integrate all these wide variety of facts to understand the world I live in, to understand what affects me around
Right.
me, what creates this environment, in what ways can I change my environment if I need to, should I recognize a point when I'm not able to do what I need? Like at one point when I say that I do need to take more action, or
Right.
at what point do I say I have other goals right now that are more important than just this particular political goal?
You mentioned it affected how you approach disagreements, but isn't that rhetoric? Like, isn't how the question of how do you approach disagreements just a question of rhetoric? Like, the only thing politics will tell you is, okay, a disagreement should not be approached by force. It should be approached through
Yeah,
discourse. And then after that, like, politics does nothing, right?
but that's the most immediate thing. That's all. It's the most immediate is rhetoric and persuasion. That's the most immediate impact it has, most life relevant at this time. But there are values in terms of um, essentializing the world I live in, essentializing what I might need to attain in my environment to attain a more flourishing life. You might need to recognize the political nature of the world you live in to decide what might be the best place to live or best environment to live, or do you move to a different state? Do you move to a different country? Is it your
Oh,
goals actually
okay.
work with where you are? You might need to integrate these facts more. It helps to integrate particular facts depending on your career, where you want to live. I think it can affect that.
Oh, so maybe would you say one of the benefits could be actually emotional psychological? Because if I can see how like even now is a really good example, right? We're in lockdown, and I do think that there is, well, in Australia it's less so, it's still open, but there's no events and you can't go, it's much harder to meet people now and so on. And that's a result of political decisions.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people, myself included, like there's just a general decline in psychological health. Like
Yeah.
there's more anxiety, people don't feel good. You have like this bad, you just have this more of like feelings of, oh, life is passing me by, and like just bad, just unpleasant feelings. And, but see, this is a result. Yeah, of course there's a virus, I'm putting that aside. But the point is that there are certain political decisions that were made, and now there's, I don't know if you call it political conditions, but it's clear that the conditions have some impact on your own well-being. And I don't think everyone is able to, what I've noticed in speaking to some people is that they're not able to necessarily recognize that it's due to that at least some of their anxiety and bad mental health is due to the fact that, hey, like things are very different now. You can't just go to parties anymore. You can't do this, like that. Sure, you've got other things that are not going that well, but if the, you know, there are general conditions required for you to flourish, and if they're frustrated, and if those general conditions are constantly in the background conditioning all your other problems, then that's going to affect you, and you shouldn't blame yourself. Like that's just a political thing. That's sort of, I'm just trying to get at, like, maybe one of the benefits is recognizing, like, when you are what is it, that difference between the metaphysical and the man-made, and then going like,
Yeah.
okay, right now I live in a country where, let's say you pay 50% tax, and you're like, you get depressed, you question your work or whatever, and you're like, well, hang on a second, like, would I be this upset if I wasn't paying any tax? Like, maybe it wouldn't be the answer, but my point is, like, that all that stuff feeds into your own evaluation of how your life is going. And if you can recognize those things frame them in both a concrete and abstract way, maybe one of the benefits is, yeah, your view of yourself, and you don't blame yourself where blame isn't due.
That could be part of it, like identifying your environment. Where
Right.
are you in relation to the world, not just who you are internally, but what's the world you're living in like.
Right.
Yeah, it's the man-made aspects of reality, the man-made parts of your environment, but it's a way to recognize what's going on. Like, I think often the case is just the better handle you have on your surroundings, on the facts of things, the more prepared you are to think well and healthily. I mean, I think you're right that in that context, you decide to what extent we take action, to what extent certain facts matter, but the general principles will at least help you in that way. The general principles tell you what sort of life you want to have. I think it's important to have these goals and ideals in mind to frame what you want to move towards better and better conditions, better and better life. And that's part of contextualizing everything. It's even part of integrating the world around you. I mean, there are these benefits I think you're recognizing here that the more integrated you are, I think the more they can impact different areas. A lot of it, I think, it just takes over time. These ideas start to connect more over time.
Have you been able to, I wonder if, I remember that I read that, I forgot what essay it was, but it was about rational men, and there's no conflicts between rational men in a rational society, something like
Yes.
that.
There are no
And she gave
conflicts of interest among rational men.
And I didn't fully, I got some of that enough. This is what I got that it does seem like, if I can see things in such an abstract way, politics included, maybe there's also just less internal, like going back to this internal emotional conflict. There's less of that, because can you imagine, like, I don't know, you might look at someone who's achieved something and be jealous, or feel that, oh, that's unfair, or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, the system is in their favor. But if you can view everything abstractly, like, well, what would have to happen, take your example that you gave me of a thinking tool, what would have to change about the nature of the political system or reality for them not to be successful?
Yeah.
And then you might find that that would be a world you don't want to live in. And so I can see how it might, yeah, if you have, it's hard to get this understanding of, but if you can, it might condition all your emotional responses from anxiety to jealousy as well, because you'd frame everything in a, you'd be able to see the consequences of like, you know, if you want, for example, lots of government support and scream for it and say, hey, it's unfair, we need support. And then like there's tons of inflation later, and then you start screaming about prices rising. Like you
Yeah,
wouldn't have that issue as much.
I agree.
And then you know, going back to disagreements, so it doesn't seem like, yeah, like it doesn't add anything other than don't use force, whichever it's, to me is somewhat obvious. At least today,
Yeah,
it's common sense. But then, so and then rhetoric isn't the field of politics, right? Rhetoric is
not
just
really.
some, rhetoric is like more closer to epistemology or something.
You know, maybe in between almost,
Yeah.
but more epistemology. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm
And
not
then you
sure what to
mentioned,
call it, but yeah,
how
something
do
like
you,
that.
you mentioned how, like you said, how, you know, asking yourself how you live with other people and exist with them, which was fairly abstract, but you're just saying, um, you're just saying you always have in mind the ideal relationship between different people on a political level. And then are there any examples of where you had that in mind and it shaped like your response to something, not in a political discussion, your response to something, or the way you spoke to someone, something like that?
Maybe thinking in terms of seeking mutual benefit in interactions, not any kind of vindictive thing or demanding something, but in a
Right.
way that we all get what we want. And I think me implicitly, I do that better than I used to.
Mm, okay. So
Kind of almost
applying,
like what you said. If you look at somebody that's successful, maybe don't be envious, but think of what ways can you interact with them, or if you do think of what happened in the world if to make them not successful, you can think in terms, well, maybe there's something else I can take advantage of to or work with them or become part of it. Like doesn't need to be so adversarial always.
right.
It can help you see in terms of how do you work with something rather than in opposition to.
Have have you also found, what about the relationship between the abstract principles of politics and history?
Um,
Like when you think of freedom or rights or independence and flourishing and everything else, do you have in mind examples of different societies that
yes,
existed? Or is that,
very
oh, you
much
do?
so. History in
Okay.
particular is good. For me, that's a good context. I use history a lot for it's one of the best examples for politics. But history, I know, just because I know so much of it, it works well. Like it doesn't matter almost what history you talk about. Like I know a lot about the ancient Greeks, so I have a lot of examples of failed political states, decent ones better than some that are better than others. I know a little bit, very little about Chinese history, but I can know about how some governments were better than others, or some are more freedom oriented than others, or European history a lot because history of the Enlightenment is big on understanding these principles. Um, yeah, it gives you different examples of different ways rights have been treated or not even respected at all. Like I think ancient Greece in particular and ancient Rome are really great examples of political thinking. If you want examples, concrete examples in American history for this kind of thinking, or politics in general could be, I think, for the most part, just Roman history, I think gives everything you need. Maybe some European history.
Um, uh, One thing I found difficult with history though is that it doesn't stick. Like there's so many facts and they don't
Yeah,
necessarily make me feel anything. So it's hard to remember them because they're just dry. And even if it's about, even if it's about different political systems, like the emotional reaction might be indifference. And that might be also related to an abstract understanding of politics too. But you can easily read something, even if it is very significant, and you can say so, you don't react, and then you just forget it. And it doesn't stick in mind as an example of some political principle. So that I think for me, that's one of the issues in
I think what
politics.
helps is if you have some concepts already to attach the history to concretize it with.
Right.
In a way, I mean to say that I concretize these facts with history. That I can concretize freedom in terms of the history of America, because that's a really good context even for the stuff before. Like, I know where they got their ideas from and where the ideas went to. Like, I could look at French history as French political theorists as maybe their influence, or ancient Rome and ancient Greece. So I can concretize these things, or I can concretize other ways of thinking how maybe these things are failed to be applied. But I think for the
Right.
most part, once you've got some concepts to work with, then you've got something to apply your ideas to. You can concretize them better with history.
And okay, well, maybe I'm actually, Scott Powell.
Who is he?
He's a history teacher, and he does
Oh, right.
homeschooling.
I remember him. I do remember that.
He used to have a blog, and he wrote a lot of articles in that blog. But I got his book, The History of Now, which is a very condensed and essentialized history. But I'm literally trying to memorize it as not the whole book, but just key concept as like a framework, to see if then when I start learning things, I can pin those things onto that framework. But maybe we can discuss history in the future too. So that's,
Well, I
I've
also
always
know
struggled, but I'm trying.
ways to remember it better. I mean, some of that could just be memory techniques also, to remember a list of facts sometimes. Like, I seem naturally good at that, so through practice over time, probably. Like, I don't even know why I can write it all down, but yeah, some of that's just memory technique.
I'm using Anki, but my point is to see, not memorize for the sake of memorizing, but to see if I memorize and create this scaffolding, when I then read more abstract, when I read about more abstract political principles, or when I read news, can I fit things into that scaffolding? Can I start accumulating, giving the fact some kind of emotional quality? But we can actually maybe, since I'm working on that now, and I'm just starting to like study history more, then maybe we can discuss that in relation to politics later, because we still haven't even done the this chapter on government and politics. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think that's, what was I trying to say? I don't really remember. Oh yeah, I mean, you can just have the scaffolding, and the scaffolding you use to remember these abstract concepts better. History is the concretization of politics for the most part. I mean, there's different aspects of history, but let's say political history specifically. But economic history is heavily connected, and social history is connected to that too. So it gives a wide context of a lot of stuff, history. So that's also the value of history. I mean, I use it a lot for politics, but also a lot for social issues. For me, at least, they're good context setters for me. You might have other ones better for you, but history is one of the better ways to set context for me.
Right. Well, without setting without setting a fundamental or objective for what it is you're studying in history, it's infinite, because you can study everything from sandals to underwear to languages, to the history of anything. And so I know you mentioned economics. I know Scott Powell says that is one condition, and it's an important one, but politics is the most. He claims that's the fundamental. And then, but then, I've also heard of, like, I think Leonard Peikoff says philosophy is the fundamentals. So it seems like there's different views on what is the fundamental conditioner of what affects people the most.
Yeah,
Any thoughts as to the difference between politics and, philosophy? Philosophy is
I
seen as the ultimate cause, but not, obviously there's other causes
yeah, I
of,
think philosophy is the most fundamental. I agree with Peikoff, that I think it is ideas that are the main factor about the course of history. That's what influences most the nature, what the entire environment. The philosophy will determine the politics, the economics, the social world. The philosophy determines those things differently. It's not always neat, but philosophy is the main driving force.
right.
Not necessarily that it's one philosophy, but that the ideas of people is what drives their actions, and everything else follows from that.
Right.
I would
Okay.
say too that different aspects of history are often for different ways. Like even I was reading a book on the history of information, which is really just technology, history of technology, but that also gives context to even politics to say what was necessary to bring about these radical changes in technology, what sort of world existed when these radical changes occurred. And even I can concretize epistemology sometimes
Okay.
in
Give me
terms
an
of
example.
conceptual development, like the development of the idea of how DNA functions has a lot to do with information theory, because DNA is information, really. I mean, it's encoded and translated and all of that. And in history of information, the concept is fundamental to that. The development of DNA is, or understanding DNA and passing on genes and all that. That's just very important. But then also in what context those discoveries have been made. It gets all into history, but a lot of it has to do with like, well, they've always happened in free countries, generally free, like Bell Labs in the East Coast in New Jersey has a lot of technological innovations that shape the world in a tremendous way. And like right after World War One or World War Two is when that especially happened. So it gives you a lot more context to both the politics of the world, what environment you need, but then also the thinking required to bring about these new changes in the world. But then also even learning about epistemology, say, oh, how do people actually use epistemology to develop ideas, or even ethics? What kind of ethical philosophy do you need to accomplish these things? What sort of way of thinking do you need to about your life to create these wild and new creations or new concepts? What it's not just the politics, but who are you as an individual? Like, what's your moral view? Things like that.
Have you, actually, one thing I was thinking about is maybe another aspect of a good political understanding would be where I decide to live. Like, I might say, because everything, like even on a personal level, like everything that I like and I'm exposed to and that I enjoy culturally, I think almost all of it is American in origin.
Yep.
And so someone who would say, okay, your environment is very important in determining who you are, might then make it a high priority to move to America, right? Or
I
something
think
like
so.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, I've thought about that, but that might be an example of where I take it more seriously, because it's like, you think about your environment determining who you are, and then, and you
Yeah.
see where all the technology is being created, all these ideas are being generated and so on.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Julian Jaynes, who wrote, I think he wrote,
Yeah.
what's it called? Oh, you have.
I read his
The origin.
book.
Oh, you've read it.
Mhm.
What did you think?
It's innovative. Some of it's questionable, but I like the idea. I like his thinking in it. Um, I like the idea that. Have you read it?
No, I haven't. I just looked.
Okay.
The reason why I brought it up and took an interest in it is that I think I read something about it saying that we only really started becoming conscious not that long ago. And I wondered if there was a link to philosophy. Like, if you don't have philosophy, then in a sense, you're not conscious.
I do want to point out that his notion of the word conscious isn't, he didn't use it in the book in the same sense as an objectivist was. Just, he doesn't mean just like being aware. He meant specifically like reasoning things out and reaching conclusions and things like that. Like our discussion right here, right now, like we're reasoning things out, thinking about it in depth and all that stuff. Like a real strong introspective ability, like abstract thinking and all that. So he's talking about really this conceptual consciousness, even more so that this very abstract way of thinking that we have in philosophy or logic or anything else. And in a way, that is what he's saying, because like around 1000 BC is when writing systems really began to proliferate. And that's really when the first philosophers came about. I think even like Socrates, or even earlier, like just say the pre-Socratics, or even in China, we could say 800 BC is when philosophers really started to crop up, where people are writing these things down in very introspective ways and very major advancements in civilization at the same time. So it would seem like whether or not it's questionable some of his more deeper claims about why that is, but it's very interesting when he talks about like the development of writing is what enabled people to introspect on themselves more, or even if it reflects an ability to introspect on your own thinking better, much better than before.
Right.
Like wondering about, like feeling as if you're functioning automatically, like an autopilot, like being aware but not really functioning in a self-determining way. And he makes different claims about the Iliad, showing examples of that, that some characters speak as if they are not in control, or there's times when they feel to lose control and just feel like acting in autopilot. And it just is distinguished from the more like stronger thinkers, that they're actively participating in their environment. And that's the sort of thing he talks about. Like he thinks he's got several theories, but a lot of it's based on writing. That writing is this fundamental change to how we think as in its society. It might be the cause, but whatever the cause, that's when great advancements came, conceptually speaking.
Okay. But I wonder how much of that is, okay, but Aristotle came well after writing. So it wasn't, I was curious about how much of that, well, the Thales as well. So I was curious how much of, without having read the book, how much of what he's discussing is actually what the function of ancient Greek philosophy in making us exercise our volition.
Well, we can say the Iliad came about when writing started. Actually, it might be more than 1000 BC, but when the Iliad was first created, basically, some 1000 BC, that's an example maybe of philosophy even. The Iliad was treated as a philosophical text almost. Like that was the writing system, the book everyone knew, a poem everybody knew. Like if you knew anything, you knew that. And that in a way can provide some philosophical underpinning to your thinking.
Okay. So it was less about, you think it was less about philosophers, more about writing itself. That is what.
Well, it enabled, but it enabled that ability to think in the first place. I mean, maybe it is philosophy. It's a very speculative theory.
Yeah.
It's just more, here's some interesting observations. Here's a possible explanation. It's hard to validate a lot of it, but it's a good starting point to ideas. Why is it that writing is so important? Why is the Iliad written that way? Why do philosophers seem to all show up at about the same time across all cultures?
Yeah, 551 BC, Confucius.
Yeah, it all happens like almost together.
And then 508.
So it's
508 is democracy, what's his
Yeah.
name? Clisthenes or whatever came up with democracy. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I have two thoughts. Not that I'm going to speculate on this too much, but one is transmission of knowledge. So if you have evidence and things in front of you, but you can't conceptualize it, but then you read an author who conceptualizes it for you, you've just made a massive leap that maybe you would have never made. And then the other thing is, I was thinking about this today, the crow. And so you can only hold a certain amount of units in mind, but on paper you can put down like 7 or 10 or 20 and then start rearranging them. And so maybe that's another thing. But side.
Yeah, and the same with the Iliad too. Like even just knowing it orally, because still tons of people couldn't read and write even orally. They knowing the Iliad can use it as a scaffold to remember a lot. So just by introducing that, you introduce a tool of thinking for many people. It may have took, who knows how long it took before somebody could develop a poem as long as the Iliad. But once you have it, it's almost like technology itself. It gives you a tool of thinking. It's a tool you can use.
How does the Iliad give you a tool of thinking? Like
Well, it
memorizing
gives
it?
memorization as a scaffold, or organizing how a progression of events, like what's a logical progression of events,
Oh, okay.
human behavior, philosophy, in terms of like what the gods think.
Got it.
Like, I mean, it's based on like the war began when there was a contest among 3 gods. And they asked Paris to say, which is the most beautiful of all 3 of us? And they each made an offer, but anyone with one person seemed to be an immoral choice. And well, the idea is like it's almost bringing a moral story to it too. Like it's concretizing morals. As we've talked about before, it's like the cognitive function of art there, where it brings you an ability to think better. It concretizes things. It gives you a tool of thinking. Not only the value of it as art, but what it does for your thinking.
Right.
Kind of like that.
Well,
And
that's what I got the value of art qua art was, by the way, that for your ability to fuel yourself through your abstractions, which is a kind of, that's for thinking. It's just not an immediate utility. It doesn't help me.
Sure.
Yeah,
that sounds fine.
Put some potatoes on the table or something.
Yeah. Oh, and one other thing about that, it did mention in his book, he observed that, well, the earliest writing is just like inventory. I got 5 ox, 10 pounds of grain, blah, blah, blah. And that's all writing ever was. It was never anything like, how was your day? I have a terrible day. The peasants are revolting. They never had that. But it took a while before like the earliest examples of actual discussions, like somebody missed somebody else. Like, I miss you, and that's all it was really. And you could see a progression of development across time.
Right.
About these advancements, it's not like anybody began with the philosophical dissertation. I don't think even anyone had the ability to think that. All they could think is in terms of like, I have 5 ox. You want maybe 10 ox. Well, I will give you additional grain for your ox. It's like all they could do practically.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. So he's saying it's a different level of consciousness, like an animal. Owner, be here now. Food in front now.
That's essentially what he means by becoming conscious. And before that, it's more like an autopilot thing that you feel like you're being pulled along by the gods, say, that they're guiding you and pulling you along, and you're just there for the ride. It became more of a deliberate way of living. And so he's claiming that there was a change in the nature of human consciousness that became more integrated. It used to be just like all these disintegrated aspects, and became more integrated over time. And now you have human thought as we know it now.
Interesting. Okay. I want to fit in. I got more questions. I knew we wouldn't get through all of them, but I want to fit in about Nietzsche.
Yes.
and how he affected you. So you mentioned intuition, like an appreciation of intuition more, but can you think of specific examples where, I don't know, you approach something differently, or like habits you have because of what you've read in Nietzsche, or like ways of thinking? I'd be curious to, if you want to share, you don't have to.
I try to think in terms of not wasting my time, thinking what would if I repeated this moment in time, would I want to do what I'm doing now? Like, do I think this is a good use of time? Or would I feel bad and like, no, I'd rather do something else? It's a motivational thing. That happens sometimes.
I remember that eternal recurrence. I think, is
Yeah.
that what it's called? Yeah, I remember that
Yes.
example. How do you apply that in terms of, like, like I would do this, for example. Okay, I'm thinking about this tutorial. Yes, I would do it again. I get value out of it. I ask questions, but then I wouldn't do it all day. So it is eternal
Right.
recurrence. You're just judging. Actually, let me get a better example than that. It's not a good example. Let's say once a week you eat ice cream. Just
Yeah.
as for a stupid example, like, does that mean you in your mind, for eternal recurrence, you repeat the week forever, or you repeat the, because you couldn't repeat the day if you do something once a week. You suddenly have to repeat the week, right? That would be how you think about it.
Well, the thought experiment is just that if this exact moment repeated forever until the end of existence, would you want to take the same action at the same moment? Or would you want to pick something else? Like, in a way, it's like asking, what if it was your last moment on earth? But it's more than that. It's asking if this was the only moment left and you relived it forever, would you make the same choice over and over?
But does that break down when you've got to do things like errands?
Well,
Because
I mean,
it's at
that's why I
some point.
said exactly this one moment. At this moment, this time right now, is not supposed to be about the future either. Just only this second if you repeated it endlessly.
I don't know how to apply that as much as if I repeat the week, for example. Would I, if I kept living
Well, yeah,
this week
that's
over?
different.
Yeah.
I think that'd be different. I
Yeah.
don't
Okay.
think that's how his thought experiment is supposed to be. Like the eternal recurrence was just about this individual moment.
But then doesn't that just bring you to hedonism? Because, like, if you just have a moment left, then why do anything that's long range?
Um, it could be. That's just the problem with Nietzsche, I think. That you could take it in a hedonistic way. Yes, I think so.
What
You
and
could.
what are other examples of, like, so we've got the eternal recurrence that he's influenced you in that respect. You use that
Yeah.
as a tool sometimes when you're thinking.
Yeah.
Can you think of anything else that he's had it?
Um, trying to um, usually about questioning things. That there's always a way to question something. Um, I don't like that example quite enough. Um, say about morality, I can consider it more deeply because he really asks controversial questions about even to question whether it's even good in the first place. What is morality? He doesn't take it for granted for sure. That is the thing you want to have it. He questions it intensely. So it helps me ask better questions about morality, I think, even distasteful questions sometimes. He doesn't assume the distasteful position, but he questions it, even maybe considers it. You can tell he considers the most controversial takes on things, and that helps to make sure if I'm not stagnating in my ideas, it helps keep me on my toes, maybe to ask better questions. Or I can think of what would a question Nietzsche would ask. What kind of question would he ask?
Would you say he gave you questions?
Probably. Like, I mean, I would ask, maybe I had no reason to ask whether you could transcend morality. I mean, it's interesting to consider the question. I think, even though, I mean, I don't think you can or should, but I think the question itself is valuable to understand. Like, what is the purpose of morality? Is it just some construction people made to control others, or is there an actual way we could make use of it. Is there something
Right.
good about it? Is there something life oriented? But also, maybe the biggest thing that Nietzsche is trying to keep life oriented, not always getting caught up in the arguments about the philosophy. I mean, I like that, but I can remember better to see that the point is my life. The point is living, and the point is to just win an argument. And Rand helps that too, but Nietzsche doesn't let me forget the emotional aspect of things. So the two of
Interesting.
them help me, I think better or live a better life. Rand is good for thinking better, I think, but Nietzsche is good for just like question asking, I guess I would say, and non-intuitive questions or non-obvious questions. He's good at that.
Mhm.